My name is Paula Hollstein Barria, or you can say Paula here in the UK. I'm a teaching fellow here at the law school, the University of Warwick. I teach understanding law in context and criminal law, and I've been working here for around 3 years, but first as a graduate teaching assistant and now as a teaching fellow. So my academic background is concerned with violence against women and girls. That's my research interest, was an important part of my doctoral thesis here. I studied here at Warwick. And that's the reason, or that's, I think, the most important element of my academic research. I incorporated in feminist studies, gender studies, as many people say, psychoanalysis, trauma studies, and of course the legal field, and also the provisions that are relevant to this research. I started here at the University of Warwick, doing my doctoral thesis here with my supervisors Enrique Caraballo and Solange Monthan. Previously, I had a master in philosophy and human rights here in the UK as well. But my previous professional experience was in Chile, where I am from, as a civil servant. I was working in regulatory economic bodies in Chile, mostly dedicated to antitrust law, competition law, telecommunications, type of regulation, and I completely changed my career in a sort of middle life crisis around my 30-something or so. Because I was really committed to tackle and to, in a way, contribute to tackle violence against women and girls. So yes, that was a kind of big change. So I've been working at the law school since, I think, right after the pandemic, 2021. First as a graduate teaching assistant, teaching modules like gender and the law, understanding law in context, as I say before, and also criminal law. But in my current position, just started last year as a teaching fellow, was once I graduated from my doctoral thesis. It's a really interesting question about what motivated me to go into the academia. I think really the thing about, I think it's a big issue in my country, domestic abuse, generally speaking, gender violence. So in a way, there is no woman who is not somehow touched or involved in this kind of situation, rather could be like a personal experience, but also something that happened to any part of the family, or broadly speaking in society, in workplaces. So I think I was somehow involved in completely different areas in the law, as I say before, kind of economic regulation, but my personal life was somehow involved with these issues in many different layers. So I decided to contribute to that issue in society. But my first step was, intuitively speaking, was more like trying to understand what happened in this situation. So I don't think I kind of had like an objective, I'm going to go to academia to actually, be a professor in this area or something like that. It was not like straightforward. I started just, I really wanted to understand what's happened between people who somehow are involved in this toxic or violent relationship. So I pursued studies in philosophy with with emphasis in gender studies. And then I saw, I think this is the really kind of thing that I would like to be involved in my life. And then went to another master's, how can I translate this phenomenon into the legal area? And then I started to, elaborate a project related with abuse And I found some really interesting people here at the law school. And that's the way I say, okay, I would like to spend, I think, 3 or 4 years trying to understand what happened. And then, like, an academia became like as an opportunity, but I don't think it was like a, you know, like an objective or something like that. Yeah, like the research area into the legal sphere has been mostly, as I said before, domestic abuse and generally speaking, violence against women. But specifically, I use disciplines such as psychoanalysis, trauma studies, and feminist approach as well, to actually, you know, highlight some elements of this aspect that not being highlighted, I think, before or not sufficiently. So I think the specific aspect of my research is about, well, so far has been like what victims and survivors experience in terms of mixed feelings, in terms of sense of implication, and also what I call sense of self-betrayal. Because most people tend to think that there is, especially in the legal narratives, tend to think that there is like a target, which is the victim, and the perpetrator in a completely like a binary opposition. But what has been studied, especially from psychosocial studies, is that actually victims, being victims, of course I'm not denying that at all, they need to get involved in many ways because they are surviving. They need to negotiate, they experience kind of honeymoon periods, they need to resist. And in that process, they actually get involved. They are not completely passive. So through that process, they get really into the perpetrator's mindset. And that's, I think, one of the main harms. So I try to focus my research in that thing, trying to shed light in that specific harm, which is about feeling, in a way, that you participated somehow in your own debasement, which is, of course, it's not that, but the victims and survivors feeling in that particular way. And in many times that actually prevents them to report, or even before that, they don't actually realize what's going on. I think that's one of the main challenges of these kind of things. I think it's like, especially here at Warwick, where we have like a really great students, I of course not portray myself like as a, you know, like as a depository of knowledge, like as if we're like a library. I'm not like a person who is delivering content. I try to encourage my students to say, okay, you are now like your own researcher. You need to become a researcher through your studies, your undergraduate studies, because here is just like a little bit of what you're going to apply in your professional or your academic life. So I try to, you know, say to them, I'm a just more experienced researcher, and hopefully I will provide you some of the tools that you will use in the future, but actually you are the main protagonist of your studies. I'm not like here like a mom or like a father saying, you know, I'm going to give you all you need. It's like more like a, I don't know, probably an older sister in a way. And try to encourage them like to pursue their own interests, to be curious, to be, you know, to try to, you know, discover things about the world and how in a way that has like an important effect in law, and how the law as well have a really important consequences in your everyday life. It's not about, you know, reading legal text, the case of law, or, you know, different provisions, statutes. It's actually understand how law operates in practice, and many times with discriminatory effects, not in the ideal way that, you know, the parliamentary envision how the law is going to operate in practice. So try to be critical and wonder always like how actually law is really about, but also how the law could be, I don't know, better designed and could be better applied in many cases. I think that would be my philosophy. Yes, I'm currently working on a paper. I was invited by the professor Alan Norrie to publish in a special issue of a journal about critical realism, which is like a philosophical, strand it was quite important here in the law school. My paper is about, again, domestic abuse, but is related with law, how somehow the law cannot in a way represent or portray accurately the victim experience, victim survivor experience. And how does it feel for victims and survivors to actually feeling like isolated, lonely, with holding in a way their own experience without actually being able to match the legal description. Legal descriptions tend to be abstract, technical, sometimes many blunt, not very sophisticated. So for the case, for example, of coercive and controlling behavior, you can see like there is a definition there, in the statutes, in the criminal act. But of course, experience are much more complex. As I say before, victims and survivors also get involved in many different ways. So it's really difficult to actually do this first. It's actually a requisite, like to actually, like a criminal, to actually being able to operate in practice, you need to correlate the experience and the description. And in this specific case, it's really difficult to do this match, or this is actually the experience and this is the legal description. So I study this phenomenon through the lens of psychoanalysis, talking about how victims experience a sense of lack, a sense of a mismatch between their own complex experience and legal description, and how victims, in a way, are resistant to the legal descriptions, and many times resistant not only intellectually speaking, say, actually this doesn't represent my story, but also saying my very body feels anxiety, my very body feels this sense of discomfort when the representation is just out there. And I studied this through the lens of, as I say, psychoanalysis, particularly Lacan, and also Laval, which is two authors that somehow are pertinent with this experience. Well, for me, law in context is actually, is our motto here in the law school. It's a really important concept because through our legal studies, we incorporate not only the legal sources that typically are part of legal studies, for example, the case of law, doctrinal analysis, or even discourse analysis, but also we take into account how law actually operates in practice. And actually, to analyze that, we not only, of course, use traditional legal kind of studies, but also the point of view of sociology, especially, the point of view of feminist studies, the point of view or some important theories, for example, critical race theory. So what is really important here is to actually understand that law is not like a discipline that is isolated or is just important to be analyzed through their own parameters. It's actually a discipline that needs to be discussed in a more holistic way, because actually law is supposed to be abstract equal and to be applied to everyone in the same way, but actually operate, you can see in many different institutions, for example, carceral justice, that operate with different bias. So feminist studies, critical race theory, postmodern theory, Marxist theory, like any kind of perspective that can actually shed light on how the law operates in practice will be suitable and will be important actually to incorporate. So I think that what a law in context really means, and I think it's really important to be incorporated for any person who go beyond practice in their legal studies. It's really, I think, is one of the most interesting concepts we manage here at the law school, and I think it's one of the things that I like the most here. I think, well, in my experience, especially from understanding law in context model, what the students found really interesting is all the kind of studies and different theories that come from feminist studies. It's really interesting, for example, how feminist studies is applied to carceral justice and freedom of expression, for example, is these two case studies we actually teach in understanding law in context. And most of my students found really insightful, for example, intersectionality, how, for example, gender and class and many other, different factors come together in a way that allow us to see how law, in a way, doesn't operate as it is supposed to be. You can see that, criminal offenses are supposed to be applied to everyone in the same way, but you can see that they don't operate at the same way for more like vulnerable communities, or in the case of women, for example, they have a disproportionate effect in penalties, in the element of punishment. And you can see that students, in a way, start to realize, because when they come here, they assume that the law somehow is very wise, is something that it's almost perfect, is something you would like to achieve in order to to become, I don't know, a judge, a lawyer, and they started to be more skeptical. Oh, law is not necessarily a really nice thing in many areas. Of course, it's an important element of like a society which is civilized and try to resolve their problems in a civilized way. But they start to see, oh, things are not ideal in the real world, and law is actually an important, play an important role on that. And you can see their faces, and it's really interesting.